Hi everybody, welcome to what could be the last of the Rod's Rants, because I'm going to go on to something that's really risky here. Today I want to talk about racism. So, what is racism? The dictionary would tell you that racism is when you treat somebody differently because of their race or their ethnicity. And while that's kind of true, I'm going to disagree with it. I want to offer my own definition of racism. My definition of racism is based on my biblical belief that we all come from Adam and Eve. That there's only one race, the human race. That we're all the same. So I would define racism as the belief in race. And race being that there is a fundamental difference between you and somebody else because of the color of their skin. If you think that because I have lighter skin and you have darker skin, that we are forever incompatible, that there's a fundamental difference that cannot be overcome no matter where we grew up, how we were brought up, or anything, that just makes us fundamentally different, then that's racism. And I believe anybody who believes in the concept of race, that makes them a racist. They may treat everybody equally, but they still have this idea of race. That is a fundamental divide between two people just because of the color of the skin, and that, in my books, is racism. So, how does that affect everything we do? Well, in my mind, if we forget about color in that it makes us different, then we can start working towards a common solution, towards a commonality that we are all people, we're all humans, and treat each other equally. It's not that color is not important. It's not that color shouldn't be celebrated. I have a friend who used to say that, she's not just black, she's cinnamony brown. And she celebrated her color, and I think that's beautiful. I think we all should be able to celebrate who we are. If you have white hair, blonde hair, black hair, red hair, brown hair, you can celebrate all that. You can celebrate all your colors. You can celebrate your eye color. You can celebrate your shape, your body shape, your face shape, everything. But it doesn't make us fundamentally different. You don't see people being excluded because they have brown hair instead of blonde hair. We don't have two separate lineups. We don't have any segregation based on anything else. And we shouldn't have segregation based on skin color because we're all fundamentally the same. I mean, there's a song on Christian radio right now by Mantisa called "We All Bleed the Same." If you get a blood donation, it doesn't matter what color the skin of the person who gave the blood donation is. It'll still work. It'll still save your life. So we're all equal. We're all the same. Why am I making this rant right now? Well, my Google suggestions on the Google browser on my phone has always been full this last week with different commentaries about Dowell's new search for a student union VP. And they're restricting it to people who are of a visible race, I believe is how it was put. Racial visibility, which is basically being interpreted to mean somebody who is not Caucasian. Is that racist? And I would say no. And that may shock you, given what we've just talked about. But here's the thing. We're in Nova Scotia. And in Nova Scotia, there has been racism for a long time. And it's not always talked about, but it's here. I have friends who have dark skin who feel racism from other people. They feel the judgment from other people. So it's here, and it exists. And people with darker skins, people who are visibly different than Caucasians, have been discriminated against. Even just in how they've been brought up. The schools that they went to, the towns and parts of town that they lived in, has given people from other visibilities a privilege. And by having your vice president be one of those groups of people who have historically been underprivileged isn't about there being a fundamental difference between the two people, but in this case, it's about experience. The people who grew up being discriminated against have a different experience than people who have not. I grew up with the privilege of having two parents who were married, a father who was full-time employed, all those different privileges. And while I'm not fundamentally different than people who grew up, say, in North Preston, fighting for jobs and everything else, I don't have that experience. So while I may sympathize, I can't empathize. I don't have the experiences to fall back on. I don't understand at a visceral level, an experiential level, what they've gone through. So while it sounds racist on the surface of it, it's actually not. I think it's actually a good policy to have people from a historically disadvantaged or a historically underprivileged group to be in your board of directors so they can advocate understanding from a viewpoint that I wouldn't have or somebody else wouldn't have. And we need to work this way, work towards an understanding where we are all equal, fundamentally equal in our core, who we are from birth. But we also have to understand that experientially, we're all different. And there are places that have been continually through history underprivileged and kept that way in some cases on purpose. We need to understand that, and we need to work to reverse that. And I think Dell's restriction on who they were looking at to hire for their VP is a step towards undoing that. You could consider it a form of affirmative action, but without me knowing all the details, I would hesitate to put that term on it, because that's a term of a particular program in the United States. So I wouldn't want to go and accidentally grab more term than what I want. But I think that we as people need to recognize that if part of your identity of who you are at a core that makes you fundamentally different than somebody else, if that is your skin color, and I don't care what that skin color is, but if that is a fundamental part of who you are, then you are racist. Really, you are. Because it's not the color of skin you were born with that makes you who you are. It's the journey you've been on since that point. It's how you've been raised, where you grew up, the people you've met, all the experience you've had. That's what makes you who you are. Because if it was true that there was a fundamental difference, then there wouldn't be white people, and I'm using the term as people understand it, there wouldn't be white people who are underprivileged. But there are, because of where and how they grew up. And there wouldn't be black people, to use that term again. There wouldn't be black people who are well off and didn't have all those disprivileged things. But there are. The problem is that people have seen their people as being different. We've seen different skin colors as being fundamentally different, and we've treated them as fundamentally different. And we've done it for hundreds of years, and we've ended up with this great divide. And now we need to work at healing it. We need to remember we are all one race, with all kinds of great colors to celebrate, all kinds of different hair colors and hairstyles and eye colors and everything else, accents, languages, cultures, backgrounds that we can celebrate as Canadians. But fundamentally, we're one race, human. That's my rant.